how that works.
Absolutely. So process metrics are metrics that allow you to measure and benchmark the performance of a given process. And in traditional business models, right, those metrics really revolve around how do you make something as cost effective as possible? How are you as productive as possible? But the ultimate high level purpose of process metrics, right, is really to help gauge whether the day-to-day work that you're doing is effectively contributing to your goals as an organization. And so have you introduced Criterion? Should I briefly say why we're so interested in process metrics? Okay. Right. So Criterion is a nonprofit think tank that focuses on expanding who feels empowered to engage with finance as a tool for social change. And the reason why we're focused on process metrics is because really we are focused on figuring out and sort of evangelizing that how you move money matters as much as where it actually goes, right? That the how and the process is really important. And we were reminded of this really very profoundly well by Dr. Eisler just earlier on stage, which is that you can't solve problems with the same thinking that created them, right? So choosing to move capital to social and environmental businesses is huge and it's important. But especially as an investor, that choice is not enough to change the social inequities that you're trying to address on their own, right? Because even among investment deals where well-intended capital is trying to create social impact and transform lives, you have power dynamics that still emerge between capital holders and recipients and communities. And those dynamics can get in the way of creating meaningful change.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for the overview on process metrics.
Yeah.
I love this focus on really the how and not just the where, and having a structured framework with clear questions to ask is really important in the process, and definitely resonates with me a lot as someone who's worked in the nonprofit sector. You know, oftentimes organizations feel this pressure from funders to really evaluate the outcomes, right, and the impact of their work. And it could be so powerful to really look at not just the ends of wealth distribution, but also the means. So how does one do that? How do we use process metrics to analyze for power dynamics?
Sure. So the first step really is to start with analyzing for power. So doing a power analysis and really kind of making the space within your organization to ask pointed questions about what bias is in the room, and starting with your organization's processes from the very beginning, right? Because a lot is actually happening before you ever get to social outcomes is the thing, right? So you have all of these many touch points and key decision points, and bias emerges around those. So step one really of getting to what should we be measuring is let's make the space in our organization to interrogate how power dynamics show up from the beginning to end, from when we're first setting criteria and designing a vehicle, who are we inviting, what kind of data are we prioritizing, all the way through to how are we actually, what are the structures through which we're actually moving capital, how are we asking, as you were just saying, right, like what's the burden of reporting, who's responsible for that, what are we asking them to measure. So creating space to identify who are all the stakeholders in any given process and map out what their motivations and incentives might be. And through doing that, you can start to get to, okay, what are the key areas of work or pain points that we want to focus on? And I'm just going to look at our time here. Is it still worth? Yeah, we have time. If I can sort of put up the framework that Criterion has put together to kind of help guide people on what are the different power dynamics that you want to be looking at. And now, of course, I wonder if I'll be able to share this slide since I originally there's like a settings at the bottom, but Tania, I don't know if
I might be able to. Let me see if I can try.
Out.
If you want to speak a little bit about the 7 while I try to share my screen here.
So Criterion has been focused on talking about the importance of addressing power in finance for a long time, but more recently we really started to pull from our different areas of research and our partnerships, starting to codify patterns around what are the types of power that we see coming up over and over again in investment transactions in particular. And we found that there were sort of 7 key power dynamics that we saw emerging. And those, as Tania has so brilliantly pulled up and is now sharing, those just really quickly are around knowledge. So whose knowledge and expertise are valued and matters. Around access, who is considered worthy to access capital and resources, right? It's very well documented that access and worthiness tend to be granted in finance to the white, the male, the westernized sort of person. Decision making, who holds the power across each phase of a process. Timing, whose timing is valued, right? It's classic tension in investment that you have capital holders who have sort of the luxury of time and being able to, sort of take their time in building comfort with the transaction, while at the same time, those that are trying to receive capital need to keep the lights on, need to keep moving forward in their businesses, need to keep their communities engaged. Transparency, who gets to know what when, right? Making it less of a one-way direction. Whoever's receiving the capital needs to give us all the information, more of a two-way street, and understanding of a partnership, around risk sharing, whose risks are prioritized. And then of course, alignment and incentives. When you're actually writing the contracts, what are we incentivized to do? Who is incentivized to do what? So what our approach around this framework, and thank you for pulling that up, is really to advise and sort of recommend that organizations make space when they're, deploying capital to try to create social change, to have conversations and reflect on how are these dynamics showing up from beginning to end. And whichever, in the ideal world, in the future that we're shooting for, everyone's performing really well against all of these power dynamics, right? But the truth is that process metrics are really about organizational change. And that is, a significant process in and of itself. It's not just about what are you measuring, but saying we're going to commit to changing something about how we do things, about the knowledge we prioritize, the data we're looking at, whatever it might be. So go ahead. Yeah.
That's great. I mean, it's so true, right? This is really about culture change, and that's hard work. It's deep work. Creating space to talk about power, that is tough, but it's really amazing that it's uncomfortable, but it's so important. And you've really created such a great framework to open that dialogue, which is fantastic. So I'm curious, how do you go from there, right? You do the assessment, you get a baseline understanding of how things are working. You've identified some pain points and goals. What's next? How do you go from there to then coming up with the metrics that you're going to use to measure and create the change you want to see?
Yeah. I'll give some high level examples, and I think we should dig into the awesomeness of SheEO and the collaboration that we did together around this. So, you do your power analysis, you have some challenging conversations around where bias is coming up. You name some priorities as an organization based on your values and the change that you're trying to create. And you set some goals around that. And what might those different metrics actually look like? What does it look like to measure for valuing knowledge differently? So let's take that one maybe as an example. Let's say you are an Australian investor that's trying to fund social enterprises in the Pacific, right? And so there's a clear conversation that needs to happen around cultural knowledge and experience there. And so if you want to start valuing other types of knowledge more highly, you might start tracking how much money are you spending, compensating social change actors, compensating members of the community to engage with you in the design of your vehicle, to sit in on conversations around deploying capital, right? And so prioritizing local experience, also boots on the ground when you're setting your criteria for who are we going to partner with. There are things, right, that you can actually track for. Are we paying as much? Are we valuing as much for social experience as we are for financial expertise? Or if you were to recognize that you wanted to make strides in more equitable decision making, you might start tracking what percentage of your meetings, which meetings, particularly those focused on making decisions about investment and moving capital, have members of the community involved, have social issue experts that are actually in the room and not just counting heads, right? But who has a say in deciding? And yes, it can seem a bit abstract at first, but there are real things that you can hone in on around what to measure to figure out how are we doing and how we're actually trying to value knowledge and decision-making and transparency and different things differently.
I love that. It really aligns with, SheEO's credo and what we say around our co-created environment, right? We're a co-created environment built on trust, and really bringing all the voices into decision making is so important, which is one of the reasons why activators all take part in the voting of the ventures, and we really share that decision making process, and that's true across all the other processes at SheEO too. So let's talk a little bit about how this framework might apply to SheEO, because I know we had the opportunity last fall to work together on this a bit, and work with your team at Criterion to take a look at SheEO's funding model, and you got to interview activators and ventures and take a really deep dive in our practices. So tell me, Alyssa, what did you find? What surprised you? What stood out?
Well, first of all, maybe it's worth saying that what I found inspired me to become an activator in that research process, right? So I'm now a proud activator. And it's also worth naming that the reason why Criterion really was excited about partnering with SheEO is because you have been, right? Your processes are radically redesigned to account for power. So we were looking to learn as much as we were looking to sort of test and understand what we were trying to build. And as you were just sort of speaking to, the core lesson I think that really stood out for me in that collaboration was how much trusting relationships are at the core of effective investment decision making. And effective is a really important and key sort of word here. We also sort of started to allude to and talk about, I feel like it's tied to caring pays, right? As we talked about in the plenary earlier. So this is the importance of trusting relationships to effective investment decision making is important and is relevant across all different types of investment. It's certainly not just venture philanthropy, right? Investment processes themselves are basically about building trust. And we do that, right, in different ways, through financial records, through due diligence research, but also, as SheEO really invests in and does differently, through investing in relationships. And SheEO truly is gold standard when it comes to addressing power dynamics in and sort of investing in the importance of relationships to address that, right? So if we just take a look at how SheEO values knowledge differently, inherent to the model is a valuing of different types of lived experience and different types of expertise. And this valuing allows for, and the ask-give phenomenon, right? This valuing allows people to feel comfortable, to feel safe, naming what they really need. And also to feel comfortable and feel safe, sort of naming what they have to offer. And while that feels powerful to the individual, that's also how you get really good at solving problems, right? It's about investing an outsized amount of time and resources and creating a certain type of space where that sort of exchange is possible. So it feels good to participate as an individual, of course, but you also have, through the SheEO network, a very powerful problem-solving machine that's really effective at matching needs and resources, right? In a way that we haven't seen and we don't see in traditional investment contexts, where there's not trust and where the relationship doesn't come first.
Absolutely. And it's so great that you named that, is creating space to name what folks need and what they can offer. That's such a core practice at SheEO. And for those who are new in the audience to SheEO, we have a set of values and practices that we've recently published on our website. I'll drop the link here. Actually, Denise Hearn, who spoke earlier, helped to draft these with us. And radical generosity is a core value at SheEO, along with co-creation, transparency, and you can see the rest on the link there. But really being in community and building trusting relationships is at the heart of what we do. We do that through our weekly activator calls, or through a bunch of online platforms, Ask Give and our community platform. We have learning circles to really facilitate peer learning. So really trying to practice those values of building a co-created community that's built on trust. So Alyssa, now that I think we have just under a minute left, tell me what's next. So you've developed this framework, you put it out there. What's next for this work on process metrics, and what's your ask of the group listening today?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, an ask. I think we would just, we're still testing it, and we're still wanting to connect with others who are interested in sort of applying the framework and sort of trying to take on process metrics for power as a potential project to change their organization. So please reach out and connect with us if you're interested in talking through this work and how it's relevant to you. Please give us feedback if you feel compelled to, on whether this framework, on how the framework resonates or how it doesn't. What is it missing? Or have we captured all types of power? Definitely looking to connect, to continue refining, to continue learning, and looking for partners in that. So
amazing. Incredible. Thank you so much, Alyssa, for your time and expertise today. I know we didn't get to the rest of the questions, so please reach out to us and connect directly. And thanks so much for joining us today to learn more about analyzing for power dynamics. Please connect, and we'll see you back in the main stage shortly. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you.